Okay, Unit 3 is known as the Age of Exploration, and one of our first big ideas is how do new ideas change the world? And we're going to see a lot of ideas developing during the beginning, especially of Unit 3, and as a result, the world is drastically changing. For now, I'm going to give you a quick overview of what to expect from Unit 3. So your notes do not need to be very specific. You can just capture the big central ideas, and you should be taking Cornell notes. So the Age of Exploration, again, is our theme for Unit 3, and it's called that because Europe is going to set out and travel the world and pretty much double the known size of the world. So in Unit 1 and 2, there is very little, if any, transatlantic, so across the Atlantic movement, and very little trans-Pacific movement. Remember, we don't have sophisticated ships or navigation so far. And in Unit 3, however, Europe is going to set out across the Atlantic and Pacific. Now that they've arose with trade and the Renaissance, Europe is antsy to grow and to travel. And there are some issues because the Muslim Empire, meanwhile, has grown in the Middle East. And Africa has risen in Africa, south of Europe, and so there's really nowhere for Europe to expand. So they decide to set out. So the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Italian, the Dutch, the French, and the English all start our exploration period. Their key goal is to make it to Asia, to kind of circumvent or go around the Middle East because of the Crusades and the negative feelings, and not to mention that travel by land is quite slow and inefficient and expensive. So Europe is going to discover lands that weren't even known about, such as the Americas. They'll find out about East Asia, like think Indonesia and Australia, and areas of Africa that were unknown, so sub-Saharan Africa primarily. It is during this time period that the world is circled for the first time by Magellan and his crew, but it's done multiple times. New ideas also developed during the Age of Exploration. We have the Renaissance, the Protestant Reformation, the Scientific Revolution, and the Enlightenment. So we ended last unit with the Renaissance, with the rise of Europe, the new interest in art, in the human spirit and human nature, how the body works, basically a departure from religion. And during Unit 3, as a result of the Renaissance and these feelings, we see Martin Luther challenging and attempting to reform the Catholic Church, coming up with new ideas about Christian theology, creating new sects of Christianity. As a result, Catholic reformers will attempt to answer these criticisms in what is known as the Catholic Counter-Reformation. Catholics don't want to be known as corrupt and negative, and many in the Catholic Church really do want positive change. So the Catholic Church is going to shift as well as a response. There's going to be a revolution in science. The scientific method that you use in science class today is going to be developed, and we have brilliant thinkers such as Isaac Newton, Galileo, Copernicus, etc., who are figuring out some of the laws of the universe, of gravity, of how the world rotates, about how our days, our years, and the science behind it. We will also have new thinkers who will try to define what it means to have a government, to play a role in the government. What role should the government play in people's lives? So we have essentially with the Renaissance a cultural revolution. With Martin Luther, we have a religious or spiritual revolution. With the scientific revolution, we have a revolution in science. And lastly, with the Enlightenment, we have revolutions in politics and government structures. So almost every aspect of the world is going to drastically change. To speak more to that last bullet point about changing relationships between the citizens and the government, think Magna Carta. Magna Carta was sort of the precursor to the Enlightenment. And in Units 1 and 2, civilizations spread out because of their military conquests. Think Genghis Khan, the Roman Empire, the Islamic empires. We create empires because one army has been stronger than the other. It usually has strong hierarchical setups with kings and emperors at the top. But Unit 3, this begins to change. Instead of having large empires, we have smaller but more culturally homogeneous or similar nations. So our first nations begin to rise. We have the formation of modern states for the first time. So states are countries. Like Russia, Spain, England, France have their own identity and their own boundaries. And these states are formed not based on military conquest, but on constitutions and common agreements. All these people of the same culture agree on the same rules and how they want their country to look. And so these are the very first, almost like infant states with a culture of what exists today in Russia, Spain, England, and France. So here we have a very early modern map of the modern world, which means it includes the Americas. It's, as you can see, not accurate, but that's because there was a lot of exploring to do, a lot of land left to discover and map out. One continuity we have, we're going to be talking about our next essay coming up, and continuity means things that stay the same or continue. And it's the pace of technological growth, or the driver of technological growth. Almost all invention is still military based or navigational. So cannons, muskets, maps, compasses, etc. And necessity is always the mother of invention. So our inventions are coming from need. And as Europe finds a need to travel and find a different way to trade, they develop technologies that support that. This picture, of course, is a lion who feels the need to become taller in order to dominate and probably eat the giraffe. Go ahead and write down from your notes or highlight in your notes 5 causes of the Protestant Reformation. From your reading, pages 368 to 376. And as often the case with these online lectures, I end up giving you more answers than I would like. But the causes of the Protestant Reformation are because of abuses by the Catholic Church. So there are 5 major abuses, and the first is that the church is too involved in worldly affairs, and worldly means like everyday life affairs, meaning government, social norms, economy, etc. Popes are competing for political power. They're competing with the Holy Roman Emperor, trying to be able to tell people what to do, and really they're attempting to serve as the emperor and make the emperor their puppet. Also, sorry, I forgot to mention, at this point, you need to start making more detailed notes, okay? We're not doing the general overview, we're taking detailed notes about the Protestant Reformation. But we're still in Cornell format. Okay, so popes also were gathering a lot of money from the peasants and the lower class, and at the same time, they're living a lavish lifestyle, which means extravagant. They have nice things, they spend lots of money, and this also goes against the teachings of Christ, who says, of course, we need to be a minimalist. You don't need more than you, or want more than you need. Live a simple lifestyle, etc. So the people see this and feel negatively about it. The church is also increasing fees for various services, for weddings, for funerals, for last rites, etc. And this upsets the people. They feel that if the church is going to tell them they need them, to overcharge them is unfair. Churches were also selling indulgences, which is really what is the straw that breaks the camel's back for Martin Luther. So indulgences were almost like a ticket, a free ticket, golden ticket to heaven. So if you paid enough money, essentially, no matter what your sin, you would go straight to heaven, not have to worry about hell or purgatory. So why are these problems? Because the church is being hypocritical. They're meant to help with spiritual matters, not politics, not corruption. They're supposed to preach the unimportance of material goods, and yet we're living lavish lifestyles. The church is all about the money, and this becomes an issue for some of the more aware followers. Martin Luther has 3 essential teachings. So as you read in your book, Martin Luther was a priest in Germany who saw issues with the church, and his first teaching in his 99 Theses that he writes are that salvation is achieved through faith alone, not through good deeds, as the selling of indulgences would suggest. So he says, if you're spiritual, if you follow the Bible, you will go to heaven. You don't have to give money to the church or buy indulgences to go to heaven. Luther also says that the Bible is the only source of religious truth, not the church. The church can't make up its own rules. The church has been saying, for example, that you have to go to church on Sundays, that you must commit a certain portion of your income to the church, and none of this is in the Bible. So Luther wants to do away with those rules created by the church. Additionally, he says the church hierarchy and priests do not have special powers. Everyone has equal access to God. The priests and church officials should not be talking down to the peasants about how they're more spiritual and etc. to make the people feel bad and in need of the church. So that is the Protestant Reformation that occurs in Germany. Here we have a separate, but at the same time, Reformation that occurs in England. And the leader of this Reformation is not a priest or a spiritual leader, but is King Henry VIII. And King Henry VIII is seen on our left, and he would like an annulment to his wife Catherine, who is seen at the bottom left. An annulment is basically a divorce. He wants to undo his marriage to Catherine. They had only had female children, and he was not happy. He wanted a male heir. So King Henry reaches out to the Pope and asks for permission to get an annulment. I believe this started over. If I am overplaying myself, I apologize. But the Reformation we just discussed was the one in Germany, led by Martin Luther. There's actually another Reformation that happens at the same time, and the leader of that is not a priest or a religious enlightened fellow. Instead, it's King Henry VIII of England. And King Henry VIII of England, seen on our left, would like an annulment from Catherine, who's seen on the bottom left. An annulment is basically a divorce. He wants to cancel and undo the marriage he has with Catherine. She has not given him male heir, and he wants one. So King Henry reaches out to the Pope and says, "The Pope, I would like to undo my marriage to Catherine." He presents his reasons, but the Pope says no. But King Henry, however, has other plans in mind. He's quite determined, and he's a king. He doesn't see why he should listen to the Pope. So Henry decides to take over the English Church himself. Charles V. He passes the Act of Catherine is the niece of Charles V. And says Christians in England probably no longer that Henry VIII married Catherine. The Pope doesn't rule over these Christians. Marrying her connected to the Holy Roman Emperor. So King Henry decides he is the head of the Catholic standing and give him more political church in England. Tug and say. So he wants to divorce Catherine, but doing so would embarrass the family, would embarrass Catherine, and upset Charles V. And as the Pope and Church breaks with Rome, as it renames itself the Anglican Church together, and it uses its own English Bible. The Pope is not going to upset most Catholic forms of worship. So he tells King Henry, no, you must stay married to Catherine. So this was another branch of the Reformation. But this story we're going to dig a little deeper because it's sort of like a soap opera. So there's King Henry on the left, and he does get his annulment to Catherine. And on the right is Anne Boleyn. She's a feisty girl. She's very flirty and quite coy. You may have heard of her if you've seen or heard of the movie The Other Boleyn Sister, but the main character is Anne Boleyn. So Henry marries Anne Boleyn. They have a daughter, not a son. The daughter's name is Elizabeth. Henry is not only jealous, but he wants a son. So he makes up the story and maybe really believes it and convinces himself that Anne Boleyn is cheating on him. And he wants to marry again, so he imprisons Anne for treason and then has her beheaded. Henry actually goes on to do this to 4 more wives. He's not a good husband, but that's another story. So remember this daughter, Elizabeth. You may have heard an English name, Elizabeth. It should, strike a chord with you, but we'll get to it in a minute. So England is in some religious turmoil. Henry dies, and his oldest son, Edward, is only 10. And 10-year-old Edward inherits the throne. Edward, since he's only 10, probably not a great leader, has many advisors. And his advisors bring many Protestant reforms to England. These reforms are happening again in Germany with Martin Luther and John Calvin, as the Protestant Reformation is really taking full swing. England tries to look more like them. But Edward dies young, in his teens, and so his half-sister, Mary Tudor, returns England to Catholicism. The Tudor family is quite famous. They have a TV show as well, but Mary dies. And then that's right, Elizabeth, that daughter that Henry had with Anne Boleyn, becomes queen. You may have heard of Queen Elizabeth of England. That's her. She also has a movie. So she works out a compromise, a middle ground between Protestants and Catholics. She finds peace in England. Under Queen Elizabeth, Shakespeare writes his plays. Queen Elizabeth is a huge fan, attends the Globe Theatre often, but many other cultural developments, great writers come out of Queen Elizabeth's England. She's pretty well known. So, the effects of the Protestant Reformation, both in England and in Germany. Luther, he has to flee for his life to Northern Europe, but he gains many supporters. And so, Protestantism grows. Peasants begin to revolt as they realize they're being taken advantage of with these indulgences and additional fees. German peasants start to demand changes. They hope for Luther's support, but didn't receive it. Luther's not really one for the peasants, apparently. We have a Peace of Augsburg, and this is when the Holy Roman Emperor allows each German prince to choose which religion his land would follow. Rather than being overthrown, potentially killed, he decides, let's have some form of democracy. As a result, the majority of Germany leaves the Catholic Church and switches to Protestantism, or Lutheranism at the time. We also have that English Reformation under King Henry. We get the Anglican Church. And we have a Catholic counter-reformation. And we'll talk about all the changes that the Catholic Church made in a second. But the Catholic Church is pretty alarmed by how many people it's losing. Flash forward to today. We're in a similar situation. So the Catholic Reformation is led by Pope Paul III. He doesn't want to lose all his followers. That means he loses power. And we like to think he had a good heart. His goal was to end corruption in the church. He created the Council of Trent, which reaffirmed Catholic values. He said, let's go back to why we exist in the first place. And he said, maybe we can find a compromise. Salvation will come from faith and good works. So maybe not the kinds of donation to the church, but helping out the poor, giving your time, volunteering, and then believing in the Bible. He also says the Bible isn't the only source of religious truth. You should still listen to the church. But he makes it nicer and tries to seek out and get rid of corruption among his officials. Unfortunately, this also leads to a grand inquisition, which means questioning. The church courts used this inquisition to try to find heretics or witches, people who seem to have supernatural powers, like Joan of Arc. They used torture, secret testimony, execution. A lot of neighbors ratting each other out, a lot of people dying. It doesn't exactly make the Catholic Church one that you really feel safe in. So that's the end of the Catholic Reformation. But we have a lot of shifts in the church happening. See you tomorrow. Have a good weekend.